Imagine for a second that you're invisible, not in the magical way you see in movies, but in the cruel way real life can make you feel, where people walk right past you as if you're nothing but air, where your voice echoes into the void and no one cares. Now imagine you have an extraordinary talent, a gift that could change lives, but the world simply refuses to notice because you don't wear the right clothes, you don't come from the right place, and you don't have the right number of zeros in your bank account. That was Nadia's reality. A 27-year-old woman singing under the scorching sun on the streets of Dubai, with a worn-out guitar and a faded felt hat at her feet, while luxury cars sped by and people in expensive clothes turned their faces away. She had a voice that could make angels weep, yet no one ever stopped to listen. No one, until the day a simple act, sharing a piece of bread with a lost child, changed absolutely everything. What Nadia didn't know was that she was about to live a story that would prove something we all desperately need to believe, that no matter where you come from or how much money you have, your voice matters. And beyond that, true love can bloom in the most unlikely places, between people from completely different worlds, if there's enough courage to walk through fear and vulnerability. This is the story of how an invisible street artist won the heart of one of the most powerful men in Dubai. But, more importantly, how she won something even more valuable, the certainty of her own worth. Dubai is a city of violent contrasts. On one side, skyscrapers that touch the clouds, 7-star hotels, gold-plated cars, and wealth so absurd it defies imagination. On the other, thousands of invisible workers, street performers, migrants struggling to survive in the shadows of glass and steel giants. And it was in this brutal contrast that Nadia and Omar met. She, an Egyptian singer sleeping in a moldy shared room in Dira with 3 strangers, counting coins to decide whether to eat or pay rent. He, Omar al-Rashid, a 35-year-old billionaire magnate who could buy anything, except the one thing that truly mattered, a genuine human connection. What happened between them wasn't some sugary fairy tale where the rich prince saves the poor damsel. No, it was something much more real, much more painful, and therefore infinitely more powerful. It was a journey where both had to face their deepest fears. Hers, the fear of never being enough. His, the fear of losing control and being vulnerable. And in the process, they discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you can ever do is open your heart, even knowing it could be shattered. Because true love, the kind that truly transforms, isn't about avoiding pain. It's about choosing to love anyway, fully aware of the risks. But before we dive into this story, one that will make you laugh, cry, and question everything you thought you knew about love and self-worth, I need to ask you for something. If you believe in stories that touch the soul, that reveal the strength of the human spirit, that prove real transformation is possible even in the most impossible circumstances, then subscribe to this channel right now and turn on the notification bell. Why? Because every week I bring stories like this. Stories that aren't just entertainment, but that can change the way you see the world and your place in it. And don't forget to like this video. It helps more people discover this incredible story. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which country and city are you watching from? I love knowing these stories are reaching hearts all around the world. Now, get ready, because what you're about to hear is the extraordinary journey of Nadia, from the dusty streets where she was invisible, through the glittering halls where she was cruelly humiliated, to the moment when her voice finally echoed so loudly that the whole world had no choice but to stop and listen. This is a story about courage, about second chances, about the overwhelming power of vulnerability. And I promise, by the end you will never see love, forgiveness, or self-worth the same way again. So take a deep breath and come with me to Dubai. The warm afternoon breeze carried the scent of spices and expensive perfumes through the streets of Jumeirah, but Nadia could barely notice it. She sat on the busy corner of Al Wasl Road, her worn guitar resting on her lap, a battered brown felt hat at her feet, just as tattered as her dreams. At 27, Nadia had deep brown eyes that seemed to hold stories no one cared to hear, and dark hair tied back in a simple bun, always covered with a faded cotton scarf. Her clothes were the same as always, a once white blouse now yellowed with time, and a long navy blue skirt that hid her torn shoes. As her fingers moved across the strings, her voice carried a melancholic Arabic melody, a song about deserts and stars her grandmother used to sing. But there, surrounded by gleaming skyscrapers and luxury cars speeding past, her music felt like a whisper lost in the wind. People hurried by, some looked away in discomfort. Others pretended she didn't exist. From time to time, a coin was tossed into the hat, more out of guilt than admiration, and Nadia would nod in gratitude, swallowing the shame that rose in her throat. Dubai was a city of brutal contrasts. On one side, shop windows displayed jewels worth more than Nadia could earn in 10 lifetimes. On the other, there was her, a woman invisible in a city that only noticed those who sparkled. Nadia had arrived in Dubai 3 years earlier, from a small village in the Egyptian countryside, carrying a suitcase full of hope and a heart full of melodies. Her dream was simple: to sing on a real stage, to be seen, to be heard, to be someone. But reality was merciless. Without the right papers, without connections, without money, she was rejected everywhere she turned. Restaurants wouldn't take her, bars turned her away, and music producers laughed at her naivety. So the street became her stage, and disdain became her most loyal audience. She lived in a tiny room in Dera, an old and forgotten neighborhood of the city, sharing the space with 3 other women. The place smelled of mold and sweat, and the noise of neighbors seeped through the thin walls all night long. But it was all she could afford. Every dirham she earned was carefully counted. Food, rent, new strings for the guitar whenever the old ones broke. Nadia lived on the edge, always a step away from hunger, always one stumble away from losing everything. Yet there was something in Nadia no one could take from her voice. Even when exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders, even when humiliation burned in her chest, she kept singing. Because singing was the only thing that kept her alive, the only bridge between who she was and who she dreamed of becoming. That Thursday afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nadia closed her eyes and surrendered to the music. Her voice rose and fell with raw, unfiltered emotion, drawn from the depths of her soul. A few people paused for a moment, moved by that rare sincerity, but soon they carried on, returning to their perfect, carefully planned lives. And Nadia kept singing, not because she expected anything different, but because giving up would mean extinguishing the last flame still burning inside her. What she didn't know was that, at that very moment, someone entirely different was about to cross her path, someone who would see in her what everyone else had refused to notice. Dusk had already settled over Dubai when Nadia put her guitar away and counted the few coins she had made that day. 43 dirhams, barely enough for a decent meal. She sighed, adjusting the scarf on her hair, when she heard a faint sound coming from the alley beside her, a soft, trembling cry, the kind only a frightened child could make. Nadia hesitated for a moment. She barely had enough to survive herself, but her feet moved before reason had the chance to argue. There, curled up between 2 trash bins, and was a little girl, no older than 6. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her clothes, though once of good quality, were now dirty and torn. Her round face was streaked with tears and fear. "Hey, sweetheart, what happened?" Nadia knelt slowly, keeping her voice gentle. The girl stared back with wide brown eyes, shivering. "I got lost from my mom. I'm hungry and scared," she sobbed. Nadia felt her chest tighten. She knew all too well what it was like to feel lost in a world that didn't want you. Without a second thought, she reached into her bag and pulled out the only piece of bread she had saved for dinner. She handed it to the child. "Here, darling. Eat slowly, okay? What's your name?" The girl grabbed the bread with trembling hands. "Mariam," she whispered. As Mariam ate, Nadia began to hum softly, a lullaby her mother used to sing to her as a child. The melody was tender, comforting, and little by little, the girl's sobs faded away. What Nadia didn't notice was the silent presence watching from across the street, inside a black Mercedes parked at the curb. Omar al-Rashid had just left a grueling meeting with European investors. At 35, he owned an empire that stretched across luxury hotels, construction firms, and stakes in major tech companies. His face was marked by strong features, a sharp jawline, piercing dark eyes that seemed to calculate every move around him, and a flawless posture framed by custom-tailored suits. Omar was known throughout Dubai as the Shark, ruthless in business, cold in his decisions, and utterly focused on results. He had learned early on that emotions were weaknesses, and vulnerability was a luxury powerful men could not afford. His driver, Rashid, was about to start the car when Omar raised a hand, asking him to wait. He was captivated by the scene unfolding in front of him. A poor woman, clearly with nothing to spare, giving away her only meal to a lost child. And she was singing with a voice so pure it seemed to cut through the bulletproof glass and stir something inside him that he hadn't felt in years, something human. Omar stepped out of the car on an impulse he couldn't explain. Rashid's eyes widened. His boss never, absolutely never, mingled with ordinary people. Yet there he was, walking toward the alley with steady, deliberate steps. Nadia looked up, startled, as the imposing figure approached. The man wore a pristine white kandura, the traditional Emirati garment, and a watch that likely cost more than she could earn in a lifetime. His face was stern, almost intimidating, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. "Is this child lost?" His voice was deep, measured. Nadia stood quickly, feeling small before him. "Yes, sir. She says she lost her mother. I was trying to calm her down before looking for help." Omar glanced at Mariam, who now clung to the hem of Nadia's skirt with trust, and then back at the street singer. For the first time in a long time, he didn't know what to say. This woman, dressed in worn clothes, had just done something his fortune had never been able to buy. She had given without expecting anything in return, and her voice had touched a part of him he thought was long dead. Something shifted in that moment, though neither of them knew it yet. Omar pulled his phone from his pocket with precise movements and, in less than 3 minutes, had his security team on the line. He spoke in Arabic, his tone leaving no room for hesitation, giving clear orders on how to locate Mariam's family. Nadia watched, half-dazed, holding the little girl's hand, who now seemed calmer. There was something unsettling about that kind of efficiency, as if the entire world reshaped itself at this man's command. Within moments, 2 security guards appeared. Omar crouched down to Mariam's level, and for the first time, his stern expression softened slightly. "You'll be fine, little one. These men will take you back to your mother, all right?" Mariam nodded. But before leaving with the guards, she turned and wrapped her arms tightly around Nadia's legs. "Thank you, pretty lady. You sing so beautifully." Nadia's eyes stung as she stroked the child's hair. When Mariam was finally taken away, a strange silence settled between Nadia and Omar. He studied her with that intense gaze, as if trying to solve a riddle. "You have a rare talent," he said at last. "That song. I've never heard anything like it." Nadia's face grew warm, a mix of pride and discomfort. "Thank you, sir, but I should be going now." She turned to grab her guitar, desperate to escape a situation that made her feel far too exposed. "Wait!" Omar's voice froze her in place. He stepped closer, and Nadia caught the scent of his expensive cologne. Woody, sophisticated, a world away from her own reality. "What's your name?" Nadia hesitated. Part of her wanted to shout it, to finally be seen, recognized. But another part, the part that had been rejected and humiliated so many times, wanted to run. "Nadia," she whispered, clutching the guitar to her chest like a shield. "Well, Nadia, I'd like to make you an offer." Omar reached into the inside pocket of his kandura and pulled out a business card. It was heavy, premium stock, with embossed gold letters. "I'm hosting a charity gala at the Burj Al Arab next week. There will be music, auctions, dinners. I'd like you to sing there." Nadia looked at the card as though it were a venomous snake. The Burj Al Arab, the most luxurious hotel in Dubai. She had walked past that sail-shaped building hundreds of times, always from a distance, always knowing that world wasn't meant for her. I can't, sir, she said, her voice faltering. Omar's brows drew together. Why not? You would be well paid, and it would be an excellent opportunity to— I said I can't. Nadia cut him off, louder than she intended. Tears threatened to spill, and she hated herself for it. The truth was, Nadia was terrified, not just of failure, but of being exposed, judged, ridiculed by people who would see her as an intruder in their world. She had tried before. She remembered vividly, 2 years earlier, when she'd managed to get an audition at a 5-star restaurant. The manager had laughed in her face at the sight of her plain clothes and calloused hands. "You think our clients want to hear a beggar sing?" he had sneered, before ordering the guards to escort her out. The humiliation still burned like a brand on her memory, and now this man, this powerful man who had probably never known hunger, never slept on a mattress crawling with bedbugs, never been invisible, was offering her exactly the kind of stage that could destroy her all over again. "I'm sorry," Nadia murmured, quickly wiping away a rebellious tear. "I'm not the kind of person who fits in your world, sir. Thank you for the offer, but I need to go." She hurried past him, clutching her guitar and the hat with its meager coins, her footsteps echoing quickly down the sidewalk. Omar remained standing there, the business card still in his hand, watching this extraordinary woman disappear into the crowd. And for the first time in a very long time, Omar al-Rashid felt completely unsettled, facing a situation money could not fix. The days that followed felt gray for Nadia, even under Dubai's relentless sun. She kept singing on the same corners, collecting the same coins, returning to the same cramped little room in Dira. But something inside her had shifted. Omar's business card, thrown into a trash bin right after their encounter, haunted her thoughts like a stubborn ghost. What if— that cursed question wouldn't leave her alone? What if that had been her only chance? What if she had let fear win again? On Tuesday morning, Nadia was setting up her makeshift stage on the corner of Al Fahidi Street in Dubai's historic district when she felt a presence beside her. It was an elderly woman, wearing a traditional black abaya and a finely embroidered shawl that partially covered her graying hair. Her face was a map of deep lines, each one telling a different story. But her eyes, her eyes were surprisingly young, bright, and filled with a wisdom that seemed to stretch across generations. "May I sit here, dear?" the woman asked, pointing to the step beside Nadia. "Of course, madam, please," Nadia replied, adjusting her guitar. The woman lowered herself carefully, releasing a long sigh. "My name is Zara, and you are the young woman who sings as if you're speaking to God." Nadia blinked in surprise. "You've heard me sing before?" Zara smiled, and that smile transformed her entire face. "I come here every week to visit my niece who works at the carpet shop down the street, and every week I stop to listen to you. Your voice carries something no school could ever teach— truth." Nadia felt warmth spread through her chest. Rare were the moments when someone truly saw her, truly heard her. "Thank you, Madam Zara. That means a lot to me." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the streets go by. Old Dubai moved at a different rhythm than the rest of the city, slower, more human. The buildings were low, made of coral stone and plaster, and the air was thick with the smell of incense from tiny spice shops. It was as if time itself had forgotten to run so fast there. "You look sad, child," Zara said suddenly, turning to face Nadia. "Not the sadness of hunger or exhaustion. It's the sadness of someone who let something important slip away." Nadia felt a knot tighten in her throat. How could this woman see so clearly? I was given an opportunity, but I was afraid I wasn't good enough, afraid of being humiliated." Zara nodded slowly, as if she already knew. "Fear is a harsh gatekeeper, my dear. It stands at the door of our dreams and convinces us we don't deserve to enter." "When I was young," Zara began, her voice taking on the tone of someone recounting old tales, "I was a dancer. I danced at weddings, at festivals, at celebrations. My body told stories my mouth could never express. One day, a businessman invited me to perform in Paris. Paris, can you imagine? A poor girl from the desert going to the city of lights. Her eyes sparkled with the memory. But I said no. I was afraid. Afraid to leave my family, afraid to fail, afraid to find out I wasn't as special as I thought. So I stayed, and I danced at weddings for the rest of my life. She paused, and Nadia saw an old sadness cross that time-worn face. Don't misunderstand me, dear. I had a good life. I married, had children, grandchildren. But always, I carry with me that what if. What if I had gone? What if I had been brave? Zara gripped Nadia's hand with surprising firmness for someone her age. Listen to a foolish old woman. A heart that opens is far more precious than any palace that stays closed. Vulnerability is not weakness, child. It is the doorway through which life enters. And yes, you may be rejected, you may be humiliated, you may even fail, but at least you will have tried. At least you won't have to live with the what if. Zara's words fell over Nadia like rain on the desert, sinking deep, awakening something that had long been asleep. The next 3 days were heavy and colorless for Nadia, even under Dubai's relentless sun. Zara's words echoed in her mind like a persistent mantra, especially in the long moments when she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her roommates snore. A heart that opens is far more valuable than any palace that stays closed. She tossed and turned, wondering if it was already too late. The charity event would be on Friday. She had remembered the date, even after telling herself she wouldn't go. On Thursday morning, something inside her simply gave way. Nadia took the bus to the commercial district, got off at the stop closest to the address she had memorized, and stood frozen in front of the glass and steel tower that housed the offices of Omar al-Rashid. The building reflected Dubai's blazing blue sky, so tall she had to tilt her head all the way back just to glimpse the top. The main entrance had golden revolving doors, guarded by a man who looked like he had stepped out of an action movie. Nadia took a deep breath, smoothed down the navy skirt she had washed 3 times in an attempt to hide the stains, and stepped inside. The lobby was absurdly luxurious. Italian marble floors, glittering crystal chandeliers, and a cascading fountain in the center. She felt like an ugly stain splattered on a flawless painting. "May I help you?" the receptionist asked with a professional smile that never touched her eyes. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, she gave Nadia a quick once-over with a look that said more clearly than words, "You don't belong here." Nadia swallowed hard, her palms damp with sweat. "I would like to speak with Mr. Omar al-Rashid. He made me an offer a few days ago." The receptionist arched one perfectly shaped brow. "Mr. al-Rashid doesn't receive visitors without an appointment, and certainly not—" She paused, carefully choosing her words. "People who haven't been cleared by our security team." Heat flooded Nadia's face. There it was, the first humiliation, and she hadn't even truly stepped inside yet. "Please," she insisted, hating how desperate her voice sounded. "I'm Nadia. He gave me his card and invited me to sing at an event. I just need to confirm." The receptionist let out a little laugh she tried to disguise as a cough. "Listen, dear, plenty of people say they know Mr. al-Rashid. I've worked here for 5 years, and I know exactly who has access to him. And you most certainly are not on that list." Nadia was about to turn away, fear screaming in her head. "I told you so," when she heard footsteps. It was Rashid, Omar's driver, stepping out of the elevator with a leather folder in hand. He stopped when he saw Nadia, his eyes widening in recognition. You're the young woman who helped the lost child." He approached quickly, ignoring the receptionist's puzzled look. "Mr. al-Rashid has mentioned you several times. He'll be glad to know you came." 15 minutes later, Nadia was seated in a soft leather chair in Omar's office on the 42nd floor. The walls were entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of Dubai that stole her breath away. She could see the Burj Khalifa in the distance, the Persian Gulf shimmering under the sun, and the city stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The office itself was minimalist, but every detail whispered of quiet wealth: a massive dark wood desk, contemporary art on the walls, and shelves lined with books in Arabic, English, and French. Omar entered with steady steps, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nadia's yearly rent. When his eyes landed on her, something in his stern expression softened. "Nadia," he said, and there was something almost like relief in his voice. "You came." She stood quickly, her legs trembling. I came to accept your offer, if it's still open." Omar smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile, but one that completely transformed his face. "It's more than open. In fact, I was trying to find a way to track you down again." He motioned for her to sit and took the chair beside her, not behind the imposing desk. "The event is tomorrow night. I know it's short notice, but my team can provide everything you need: clothes, transportation, rehearsal." Nadia nodded, struggling to process it all. It was really happening. She was about to walk through the door she had feared for so long, and there was no turning back. The night of the event arrived like an inevitable storm. That afternoon, an entire team had been sent to Nadia's tiny room in Dera: stylists, makeup artists, hairdressers, transforming that miserable space into an improvised dressing room. Her roommates watched wide-eyed as Nadia was transformed. The dress they chose for her was a deep petroleum blue, with fabric that flowed like water over her body, its neckline modest yet elegant. It wasn't the most extravagant gown. Omar had instructed his team to respect Nadia's essence, but it was, without question, the most beautiful thing she had ever worn. Her hair was styled into soft waves, and her makeup highlighted her brown eyes without masking her natural features. When Nadia looked at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror, she barely recognized the reflection staring back. She looked dignified. The car that picked her up was the same black Mercedes, with Rashid at the wheel. On the drive to the Burj Al Arab, he tried to calm her with light-hearted stories about other events, but Nadia could barely hear him. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure it could be heard. When they finally pulled up to the sail-shaped hotel, illuminated against the night sky like a giant jewel, Nadia had to take several deep breaths before stepping out. "You'll do great," Rashid said with a fatherly smile. Mr. Al-Rashid doesn't misjudge people. But the moment Nadia walked into the grand hall, a colossal space decorated with Swarovski crystal chandeliers, floral arrangements that must have cost fortunes, and tables set with gleaming silverware, she knew instantly she had stepped onto a battlefield. The stairs came like knives. Women in designer gowns that probably cost more than Nadia would earn in years looked her up and down with expressions that ranged from malicious curiosity to open disdain. Men in tuxedos clustered in groups, champagne glasses in hand, occasionally throwing assessing glances in her direction. Nadia felt like a fish out of water, or worse, like an intruder in a gilded museum where she wasn't allowed to touch anything. "Who's that?" she overheard a woman whisper, not discreetly at all. "Must be some hired entertainment. Look at her hands, they're working hands." Another voice snickered. "Omar must be trying to look charitable. How cute." Nadia pretended not to hear, keeping her head held high as a staff member led her to the performers' area. The stage was small but elegant, set up in a corner with professional lighting and a sound system that would make any musician salivate. There she met the other performers of the night: a distinguished Austrian string quartet, a renowned French pianist, and an Italian opera singer who greeted her with genuine warmth. "First time singing for this kind of crowd?" the Italian, who introduced herself as Julia, asked as she adjusted her spectacular red gown. "Yes, it's the first time I've sung anywhere that isn't the street," Nadia admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Julia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then you have something they'll never have: hunger, real hunger. Use it." Julia was a relief, but not everyone in that glittering hall was an ally. Nadia was required to mingle before her performance. Omar had insisted she feel comfortable in the setting, And that was when she encountered Layla al-Mansouri. Layla was a well-known Dubai socialite, the daughter of an old, powerful family, and from the whispers Nadia picked up, someone with a particular interest in Omar. She was stunning, jet black hair cascading down her back like silk, flawless skin, and a golden gown that clung to her body like it had been painted on. Her almond-shaped eyes fixed on Nadia with the precision of a predator locking onto prey. "So, you're the famous street singer," Layla said, approaching with a smile that never reached her eyes. She was flanked by two equally immaculate friends, forming a sort of judgment panel. Omar mentioned he had invited someone different. The word different rolled off her tongue like an insult. Nadia forced a polite smile. "Yes, my name is Nadia. It's a pleasure to meet you." Layla let out a soft laugh, sipping her champagne. "How sweet. Look, dear, let me give you some woman-to-woman advice. This world isn't meant for people like you. No matter how pretty the dress you're wearing, they can smell the poverty, and eventually, you'll slip. You'll say something wrong, do something embarrassing, and you'll be escorted out. So why not save yourself the humiliation?" Her friends chuckled softly, and Nadia felt her cheeks burn. But before she could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Layla." It was Omar, suddenly standing at Nadia's side, his expression sharp enough to make any sensible person retreat. "I trust you're making Nadia feel welcome." His tone left no room for interpretation. Layla blinked, quickly shifting her expression into something more charming. "Of course, Omar. Just making conversation." She walked away with her friends, but the look she threw over her shoulder at Nadia was pure venom. And Nadia knew in that instant that she had just made a powerful enemy. Nadia's performance was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. When she stepped onto the stage, clutching her guitar, looking even more worn under the professional lights, the hall fell silent. A heavy silence, thick with judgment and expectation. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, dissecting her every movement, every breath. For a terrifying second, Nadia thought she might faint. But then her eyes met Omar's. He sat at a table close to the stage, giving her a small nod, barely noticeable, yet filled with meaning. "I believe in you." And that was enough. Nadia closed her eyes, strummed the first notes, and began to sing. She chose a traditional Arabic song about the desert and the stars, the same one she used to sing for her grandmother as a child. Her voice filled the hall with raw, unfiltered emotion, every note carrying the weight of years of pain, hope, and dreams. When she finished, there was a suspended moment of absolute silence, that fragile instant between the end of something beautiful and the world's reaction. Then, applause erupted. Not polite applause, but genuine. Some even rose to their feet. Giulia, the Italian singer, was the first to stand, clapping enthusiastically. Nadia stepped off the stage, trembling, hardly able to believe what had just happened. She had done it. She had truly done it. But the real transformation of the night came hours later, when the event was nearly over. Most guests had left, leaving only a few groups scattered in quiet conversations around the hall. Nadia stood on the hotel's outdoor terrace, breathing in the warm night air of Dubai, staring at the Black Sea dotted with the distant lights of yachts. She needed a moment alone, away from the stares, the judgment, the pressure of pretending she belonged in that world. The terrace was stunning. Light wood floors, plush lounges, and a sweeping 360-degree view of the illuminated city. It felt like being suspended between heaven and earth. "Impressive, isn't it?" Omar's voice made her turn quickly. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, still immaculate in his black tuxedo even after hours of hosting. But something was different in his posture. He looked less rigid, less controlled. "Yes," Nadia answered softly. "It's hard to believe a place like this really exists." Omar walked to the balustrade, standing beside her but keeping a respectful distance. For a long moment, they simply looked at the city in silence. Then he spoke, his voice lower than usual. You were extraordinary tonight. Your voice, it has the power to make people feel things they've spent years trying to bury." Nadia glanced sideways at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his words. "Can I ask you something?" she said, turning to face him. Something about the night, about being so high above the world, made social barriers seem less important. Omar nodded. "Why did you do this? Why invite me? You must know hundreds of professional artists." He was silent for so long, Nadia thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, a long, weary sound, heavy with a weight she hadn't expected. "Do you want the polite answer or the real one?" "The real one," Nadia replied without hesitation. Omar turned to her, and for the first time since they'd met, his defenses seemed completely lowered. "Because when I saw you in that alley, sharing your only food with a lost child, singing to comfort her even when you yourself had nothing, I saw something I lost a long time ago. Humanity. Real connection. I've built an empire, Nadia. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I can buy anything, go anywhere, own whatever I want." He paused, and there was a deep sadness in his eyes. "But I can't remember the last time I felt something real. I can't remember the last time someone looked at me and saw past the money, past the power. My entire life is a performance, a negotiation, a chess game where everyone wants something from me." Nadia's heart clenched. She had spent so long envying people like Omar, thinking wealth equaled happiness, that she had never considered the other side of the coin. "I grew up poor too, you know," Omar continued, turning his gaze back to the city. "My father was a taxi driver. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Sharjah. I swore I would never be invisible again, never be ignored again. So I worked like a madman, studied, made connections, built businesses, and I succeeded. I became exactly what I thought I wanted to be: powerful, respected, rich." He gave a small laugh, but it was hollow, joyless. "But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I have no real friends, only business partners. No true relationships, only strategic alliances. And when I saw you in that alley with your beautiful voice and generous heart, I realized just how empty I had become." His words fell between them like sacred confessions, and Nadia felt tears sting her eyes. Slowly, she reached out and touched his arm, a simple gesture, but heavy with understanding. "I'm afraid too," she whispered. "Afraid I'll never be good enough. Afraid my voice won't matter. Afraid I'll die invisible, as if I never existed." Omar covered her hand with his, and in that touch was a connection that transcended wealth, class, and worlds. There, suspended between heaven and earth, they were just two lonely souls recognizing each other. And something between them changed forever that night. The weeks that followed felt like a hazy dream for Nadia. After that night on the terrace, Omar began seeking her out more and more. He would show up at the places where she sang, always discreet, always respectful, yet always present. He took her to hidden restaurants where they could talk without being observed, showed her corners of Dubai she had never seen, not the tourist attractions, but the quiet places where the city truly breathed. They spoke for hours about everything and nothing. Omar confessed his fear of never being loved for who he truly was, only for what he owned. Nadia shared memories of her childhood in Egypt, her grandmother's songs, the dreams that kept her awake at night. Strangely, in those moments, all their differences seemed to dissolve. Rashid, the driver, became their silent accomplice, ferrying them to discreet places, never asking questions. And Nadia, for the first time in years, began to feel something she had forgotten the taste of: hope. Not just hope for her career, but hope for connection, for being seen, for maybe, just maybe, being loved. But Dubai was a small city when it came to elite social circles, and rumors spread faster than desert fire. The blow came one night at a gala in the Emirates Palace, an event even grander than the first, a charity celebration for building schools in developing countries. Omar had insisted Nadia accompany him, not as entertainment this time, but as his guest. He had sent her a gown even more dazzling, deep crimson, elegant, making Nadia feel like someone she was still learning how to be. When she entered the ballroom at Omar's side, the whispers began immediately. She could feel the eyes, the mouths moving behind fans and champagne glasses. But Omar kept his hand steady at the small of her back, a gesture of support and claim that no one failed to notice. Layla Al-Mansouri was there, of course, more radiant than ever in a silver gown that looked like liquid. Her eyes locked onto Nadia's from across the room, and the hatred there was palpable. At dinner, Nadia sat at the main table beside Omar, surrounded by magnates, diplomats, and royals. Conversations revolved around investments, international politics, and exotic travels. Nadia did her best to keep up, but it was painfully clear she was out of her depth. The woman across from her, the wife of a minister, made a point of asking about her family and education, her smile nothing but thinly veiled malice. "Oh, how fascinating," the woman said when Nadia mentioned growing up in a rural village. "It must be so different from our world here." The poison was wrapped in silk, but poison all the same. It was during the night's keynote speech that everything collapsed. The host, a man deeply entrenched in Dubai's social circle, was speaking about generosity and giving back to the community, when he suddenly paused and looked directly at Omar and Nadia. "And speaking of generosity," he said with a smile that never touched his eyes, "how wonderful to see our dear Omar al-Rashid practicing charity so close to home, bringing entertainment from the streets, quite literally, into our ballrooms." Nervous laughter rippled through the hall. Nadia felt the blood drain from her face. "They say," the host continued, savoring the attention, "that Omar has a new philanthropic project. Though some might question whether his interests are purely charitable." The laughter grew louder, sharper, crueler. Nadia could feel hundreds of eyes on her, judging, dissecting, feeding on her humiliation. She looked at Omar, desperate for him to say something, to defend her, to stop this. But Omar was frozen, his face pale, his eyes full of conflict, torn between defending her and protecting his reputation, between his heart and the empire he had built so carefully. And in that single second of hesitation, Nadia saw everything shatter. "Excuse me," she whispered, rising from the table on trembling legs. She crossed the ballroom as whispers exploded behind her like wildfire. She could hear fragments. "Gold digger, opportunist, what a disgrace." Layla was openly laughing now, surrounded by her friends, all delighting in the spectacle. Nadia reached the lobby, tears finally breaking free, blurring her vision. She heard footsteps behind her and turned, hoping, praying it was Omar. But it was only Rashid, his eyes full of compassion. "Let me take you home, Miss Nadia," he said softly. On the ride back to Dara, Nadia cried silently in the back seat. It wasn't just the public humiliation. It was Omar's silence that broke her. He had told her she mattered, that he saw her, that what they had was real. But when it counted, when he was forced to choose between her and his world, he had chosen silence. And that silence screamed louder than any insult ever could. When she finally returned to her shabby little room in Dara, Nadia looked down at the expensive crimson gown she wore and felt sick. She tore it off as though it were contaminated, shoved it into a box never to be opened again, and slipped back into her simple, worn clothes. Because this terrible humiliation was exactly what she had always known would happen. People like her didn't belong in that world. And the greatest pain of all was that, for one brief, shining moment, she had believed she could. Nadia spent 3 days locked inside her little room in Dara, not singing, barely eating, simply existing in a haze of emotional numbness. Her roommates tried to console her, but how could she explain a pain she couldn't even fully process herself? On the 4th day, one of them, Amira, a young Filipina who worked as a maid, sat beside Nadia on the narrow bed and said something simple yet powerful. "Are you really going to let those rich people steal your voice? Because that's exactly what they're doing, and you're letting them." The words landed like a necessary slap. Nadia turned to look at her guitar leaning in the corner, already gathering dust, and felt something stir deep inside her. It wasn't hope. Not exactly. It was something more primal, more ferocious. It was anger. Anger at having been humiliated. Anger at Omar for not defending her. But most of all, anger at herself for giving those people so much power over her life, her voice, her very being. That afternoon, Nadia picked up her guitar, carefully cleaned it, and went back to the streets. But this time, it was different. She didn't head to her usual quiet corner. Instead, she went straight to Jumeirah Beach Road, the busiest avenue in Dubai, where thousands of tourists and locals passed by every day. She planted her feet firmly on the ground, took a deep breath, and began to sing. The music that came out of her that afternoon was not gentle or comforting. It was raw, powerful, filled with every ounce of pain and fury she had been carrying. She sang about being invisible, about dreaming of places where she would never be welcome, about loving someone from a different world and being destroyed because of it. It wasn't a traditional melody. It was something she was creating right there, in the moment, pouring her bleeding heart into the notes. And people stopped. Not just one or two, but dozens, then hundreds. There was something magnetic about that performance, something impossible to ignore. Nadia wasn't begging for coins. She was claiming her space, her voice, her existence. When she finished her first song, the applause was thunderous. Someone shouted, "More!" and others joined the chorus. So Nadia sang again and again and again. She sang until her throat was raw, until her hands ached from strumming, until the sun sank into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. When she finally stopped, her hat was overflowing, not just with coins, but with bills, business cards from people eager to hire her, even phone numbers scribbled on napkins. But the most important thing she had reclaimed that day was something she thought she had lost forever: her dignity. In the days that followed, something extraordinary happened. Videos of her performance on the beach, captured by tourists, started circulating on social media. One in particular, where she sang with tears streaming down her face, yet with unshakable strength in her voice, went viral. Millions of views, comments from around the world praising her authenticity, her raw emotion, her courage. Journalists sought her out, wanting to tell her story. Music producers called, offering contracts. An events manager invited her to perform at an international music festival scheduled in Dubai the following month. But Nadia didn't let the sudden success change her. She continued living in the same tiny room in Dara. She kept singing on the streets, though now crowds gathered around her every time. She used the money she earned to help others like her, street performers, migrant workers, lost children she found in the city's hidden corners. Because the humiliation she had suffered hadn't broken her, it had refined her, like fire turning common metal into steel. Zara, the wise old woman, showed up at one of her street performances, watching from afar with a proud smile. When Nadia saw her, she ran to embrace her. "You didn't let the what if win," Zara said, caressing her face. "You chose to live, even when it hurt. That is true courage." And Nadia realized Zara was right. She had walked through fire and come out the other side, not just alive, but stronger, clearer about who she was and what she was worth. Her voice no longer belonged only to her. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt invisible, humiliated, small. And that was a power no social elite could ever take away from her. Omar spent those same weeks living in the personal hell he had built for himself. On the night of the gala, after Nadia had left, he remained seated at that table surrounded by people who applauded him, flattered him, but didn't know him at all. The host had gone on with his cruel jokes, and Omar had said nothing. Absolutely nothing. He had allowed them to humiliate the only person who had looked at him and seen a human being instead of a bank account. When he finally returned home, to his 5-story penthouse with panoramic views of the Persian Gulf, filled with designer furniture and priceless works of art, Omar felt suffocated by emptiness. He walked through the massive, silent rooms, every space echoing with a loneliness that money could never fill. That night, he didn't sleep. He stayed on the balcony staring at the glittering city, thinking of Nadia crying in the back seat of Rashid's car, shattered by the cruelty of people worth a fraction of her value. And he, Omar al-Rashid, the man who claimed to see her, to value her, had been too much of a coward to defend her when it mattered most. In the days that followed, Omar tried calling her dozens of times. None of the numbers answered. He sent Rashid to the places where she used to sing, but she was never there. It was as if Nadia had vanished, and with her, any chance of redemption Omar might have had. It was during a tedious business meeting, surrounded by executives droning on about acquisitions and mergers, that Omar saw the video. His assistant had been distracted on his phone, screen visible by accident. It was Nadia, singing on Jumeirah Beach, tears in her eyes but absolute strength in her voice. Omar asked for the phone and spent the next minutes watching, unable to move or breathe properly. There she was, not broken as he had feared, but transformed. More powerful, more authentic, more radiant than ever. And in that devastating clarity, Omar realized Nadia didn't need him. She never had. She carried within herself everything she needed to shine. He was the one who needed her humanity, her truth, the way she made him feel real instead of calculating profit and loss. Omar canceled the rest of his meetings that day and instructed Rashid to drive him to Jumeirah Beach Road. When they arrived, a crowd was gathered around Nadia. She was mid-performance, her voice floating through the air like something sacred. Omar stood at the edge of the crowd, hidden behind taller people, just listening. And when she finished and the applause erupted, he saw her smile. Genuine, free, unburdened by anyone's approval. She was whole without him, and that realization hurt more than anything he had ever felt. Omar tried to approach when the crowd began to disperse, but Nadia saw him before he could get close. Her expression shifted instantly, from joy to pain, then to something harder, more guarded. She began packing her guitar quickly, clearly preparing to leave. "Nadia, please," Omar said, his voice more desperate than he intended. "Just give me 1 minute, please." Nadia froze, her fingers gripping the guitar strap so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She didn't look at him. "1 minute," she said, her voice cold. "I was a coward," Omar began, words spilling out in a rush. "That night when you needed me, I failed you. I stayed silent because I was afraid of losing my reputation, my status, my control over my perfect, empty world. And because of my cowardice, you suffered. You were humiliated, and I will never forgive myself for that." Nadia finally looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. But there was also a strength he had never seen before. "You made me believe I mattered," she said, her voice trembling. "You made me believe someone like me could belong in your world. And then, when you were tested, when you were forced to choose, you chose them. You left me alone in that ballroom, being torn apart while everyone laughed." Omar felt each word like a blade. "I know, and I would understand if you never forgave me. But I need you to know, I love you, Nadia. Not because of your voice, not because you make me feel less empty, but because you are brave in a way I never was. Because you are true when everything in my world is performance. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human." Nadia let her tears fall freely now. "Love isn't just pretty words, Omar. Love is defending someone even when it costs you something, especially when it costs you something." Omar nodded, swallowing hard. "You're right, and I failed. But if you give me a chance, not to go back to what we were, but to prove I can be better, that I can be brave like you, I will spend the rest of my life showing you that you weren't wrong to give me that chance." Nadia slowly shook her head, and the pain in her eyes shattered him. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore. And without trust, there is nothing." She picked up her guitar and began to walk away, leaving Omar standing on that beach, surrounded by people, but utterly alone. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Nadia's life. She kept singing, her popularity kept growing, and incredible opportunities kept coming her way. The International Music Festival was approaching, and she had been announced as one of the main acts. Newspapers and magazines wanted to interview her. Brands offered sponsorships. Her life was finally moving toward the dream she had carried for so long. But there was still a hollow space inside her that no applause could fill. Every night, when she returned to her tiny room in Dara, she found herself thinking of Omar, of the way he looked at her, the depth of their conversations, the connection that had once existed between them. And then she remembered his silence on that terrible night, and the anger returned, tangled with pain. Amira, her roommate, noticed the turmoil. "You still love him, don't you?" she asked one evening as they drank tea on the floor. Nadia wanted to deny it, but the tears that spilled out were answer enough. "Loving someone who hurt you is the most confusing thing in the world," she admitted. "Part of me wants to forgive him. Another part is terrified of being destroyed again." Amira held her hand gently. "Then the question isn't whether he deserves forgiveness. The real question is, can you live with the what if you don't give him the chance to prove he's changed?" Omar, on his side, didn't give up, but he knew that words wouldn't be enough. He needed actions. First, he tracked down the host from that disastrous night and in a private but firm meeting, made it clear that such behavior would never again be tolerated at events tied to his name. He donated a significant sum to organizations supporting street artists and migrant workers in Dubai, and he made sure it was done publicly, in Nadia's name. When Layla al-Mansouri tried to approach him at another social gathering, he dismissed her coldly and said loudly enough for others to hear, "I have no interest in spending time with people who find amusement in humiliating others." But the most significant gesture came 2 weeks before the festival. Omar used his connections and influence to ensure that Nadia wasn't just given a spot at the event, but the main stage, something usually reserved for world-famous artists. He also established a permanent fund to support emerging artists from underprivileged communities, calling it the Voice of Hope Foundation. He named Nadia as creative director, should she choose to accept. He did all of this without asking for anything in return, without even contacting her directly. They were actions, not words, and they were public, costing him social capital in the very circles where he had spent years building his reputation. Nadia heard about it all through others: Rashid, who occasionally came by to check on her, journalists who wanted her comment on the foundation, festival organizers confirming her new position on the lineup. Each piece of news chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. On the night before the festival, Nadia couldn't sleep. She sat by the small window of her room, staring at the stars that struggled to outshine the city lights, and thought about everything that had happened in the past months. She thought of Zara's words, "The heart that opens is more valuable than any locked palace." She thought of how she had once criticized Omar for being afraid, yet now she was doing the exact same thing, letting fear dictate her choices. The raw, unvarnished truth was this: yes, Omar had failed her, but he was human and humans fail. The real question was, had he learned from that failure? And more importantly, was she willing to be vulnerable again, knowing that vulnerability always carries the risk of pain? By dawn, Nadia had made her decision. She didn't know if it was right or wrong, but she knew she couldn't live with the what if she didn't try. She picked up her phone and, with trembling hands, typed a message to the last number Omar had used to reach her. "I'll be singing at the festival tomorrow night. If you want to be there, not as the man who disappointed me, but as the man you said you want to become, I would like you to come." She hit send before she could change her mind. The reply came in less than a minute. "I'll be there. And thank you for giving me the chance to be better." Nadia closed her eyes, drew in a deep breath, and realized something fundamental. Trusting again after being hurt wasn't weakness. It was the bravest form of love. Because anyone can love when it's safe. But choosing to love knowing the risks, carrying scars, yet keeping the heart open, that was true courage. And Nadia, the invisible girl from the streets of Dubai, was about to discover that her greatest power wasn't just her voice, but her ability to keep her heart open even after it had been broken. The night of the festival arrived with an electric energy in the air. Dubai Festival City had been transformed into a paradise of lights, stages, and thousands of people from all over the world. The main stage was breathtaking, a colossal structure with LED screens, state-of-the-art sound systems, and a stunning backdrop of the creek and the glittering skyscrapers of the city. Nadia was in the dressing room, wearing an outfit she had chosen herself, not an extravagant ball gown, but something that honored her roots. A dark blue silk tunic embroidered with golden thread in traditional Egyptian style, paired with light trousers and her old guitar, the same one that had been with her from the very beginning. She had turned down every offer of professional instruments. That battered guitar told her story, and she would not trade it for anything. Giulia, the Italian singer who had shown her kindness at that very first event, appeared to wish her luck. "You're going to set that stage on fire," she said with a tight hug. "And whatever decision you make about that rich man, make sure it comes from your heart, not your fear." Nadia thanked her, feeling the nerves build inside. But this time, they weren't the nerves of insecurity. They were the nerves of anticipation, the rush of knowing she was about to do something that mattered. When her time came, Nadia walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The crowd was massive, at least 15,000 people stretched out before her, a sea of faces and glowing phone lights. She scanned the audience and found him. Omar was in the very first row, not in some isolated VIP box, but standing there among the crowd. He wore simple clothes by his standards, a white shirt and dark trousers, nothing flashy, and he was alone. Beside him, Nadia recognized Rashid, Zara, whom Omar must have sought out and brought there, and, to her surprise, Mariam, the little girl she had once helped on that life-changing day, now there with her mother. They were all gathered, not out of social obligation, but out of genuine love. Nadia's eyes stung with tears, but she blinked them back. She stepped up to the microphone, and her voice rang out across the festival. "Good evening, Dubai. Good evening to everyone who has come from so far away. My name is Nadia, and just a few months ago, I was singing on the streets of this city for coins, invisible to most who passed by." The audience fell into absolute silence. "I have suffered. I have been humiliated. I have been broken. But I learned something precious. Our most powerful voice is born from our pain, not in spite of it. And true love, whether for ourselves or for others, requires the courage to be vulnerable, even after we've been hurt." She looked directly at Omar. "This song is about second chances, about choosing to trust even when it's terrifying, about understanding that we all fail, but that the true measure of character is how we rise after we fall." Nadia began to play, and the melody that flowed from her guitar was something entirely new, a composition she had crafted in recent weeks, blending traditional Arabic rhythms with contemporary melodies. Her voice soared, powerful and crystalline, first in Arabic, then in English, singing of deserts and storms, of being lost and then found again, of loving through fear but choosing love anyway. The crowd was spellbound. Some wept openly, others filmed, but many simply closed their eyes and let themselves be carried away. When Nadia reached the final chorus, her voice climbed to notes she hadn't even known she could reach, not through technique, but through sheer distilled emotion. And when the last note hung in the air and dissolved into the night sky, there was a suspended silence. Then the crowd erupted. People weren't just applauding, they were on their feet, shouting, crying, raising their phones like a galaxy of artificial stars. It was an ovation that seemed endless. Nadia stepped down from the stage, trembling, and there was Omar pushing his way through the crowd to her. When he reached her, there was nothing left between them. Not fear, not pride, not the walls of their different worlds. "You are extraordinary," he said, his voice breaking, "and I don't deserve you. But if you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy, I promise I will never leave you alone again. No matter who's watching, no matter what it costs." Nadia cupped his face in her hands. I don't need you to be perfect, Omar. I need you to be real. I need you to stand by me when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I swear, he said, placing his hand over her heart. Before all these people, before God, I swear. And there, surrounded by thousands of witnesses, under the festival lights in the starry Dubai sky, Omar al-Rashid kissed Nadia, not hidden away on private terraces or behind tinted car windows, but publicly, proudly, declaring to the entire world that she was his choice. The crowd roared again, but this time Nadia barely heard them, because she had completed her journey. She had left the ordinary world of the streets, endured unimaginable trials, died symbolically in humiliation, and risen stronger. And now she returned not with gold or fame, though those had come as well, but with something infinitely more precious, the certainty that her voice mattered, that her heart was strong enough to love even after being broken, and that she belonged not to one world or another, but to any space she chose to claim. Because the true elixir Nadia brought back from her journey wasn't wealth or status. It was the deep understanding that a person's worth is never measured by money or origin, but by the courage to remain authentic, the generosity of an open heart, and the strength to keep singing even when the world tries to silence you. And that lesson, that elixir, she would share with the world, one song at a time.